So how many of you are familiar with Cliff's Notes? Do they still make Cliff's Notes? No, nobody recognize? I'm really dating. You know Cliff Notes? It's the only thing that got me through British literature, so I don't know how they might have done away with that. This is, in some ways, some Cliff's Notes this morning. I used to teach a class that would go about 13 weeks on finances and things like that. We're going to do that in about 40 minutes, and try and hit some key things for us to think about in terms on this theme of getting our house in order. So, Billy Graham once said, if a person gets his attitude towards money straight, it will help him straighten out almost every other area of his life. Really? Is money, our attitude towards money, that important? I think so. R. Kent Hughes used to say, God can have our money and not have our hearts. But God cannot have our hearts and not have our money. And so Matthew chapter 6 says it this way, no one can serve two masters. For he will either hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Yeah, I think it is that important. On your outline here, I'm going to say number one is right attitude. Right attitude. And if we get nothing else today, this idea of getting our attitude towards our money right, I think, is the most important thing for us to discuss. And A, on your outline there, I'm going to say God owns it all. Now, this is something that I think is really easy for us to intellectually agree with. God owns it all, I get it, and then move on. But no, stop and think about it. Everything you have has been entrusted to you by God. You say, but I worked hard. I got a paycheck on Friday. Who enabled you to get up and go to work? Who equipped you with the mind, or the skills and the abilities to earn that living that you've earned? It can be taken away tomorrow. God enabled that. God provided those things. Matthew 25:14 says, for it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. Didn't entrust to the servants their property. He entrusted to his servants his property. And so it is with us. Everything that we have been given are entrusted to us. Haggai chapter 2, verse 8 says, the silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord. It's all his. And so there are a couple of principles that we have to get right, and if we're going to understand our attitude towards our money, and the first is this: owners have rights. Stewards have responsibility. And men, you're stewards. You don't have a right over your stuff. God has rights over your stuff. You have a responsibility for how you handle your stuff. Since all that I have is God's, every decision that I make regarding those things is a spiritual decision. So let that sink in for a minute. If everything that you have is God's and you are a steward of those things that you've been given, then every decision that you make regarding those things is a spiritual decision. It has spiritual ramifications. Third, you can't fake stewardship. Sadly, in the Christian life, at least as man sees it, we can fake a lot of things. Man looks on the outward appearance. If you're anything like me and you've been around churches and Christians for a long period of time, you can find people that have an appearance of godliness. You can't see what's going on in the heart. But stewardship, you can't fake. Your checkbook reveals your priorities. Your checkbook reveals your priorities. I recently switched bank accounts. Partially, I'll talk about communicating with our wives and things like that later, but I recently switched bank accounts largely to enable better conversation and awareness over our finances. And the bank account I switched to has an app that helps put graphs together of where your spending is and things like that. It is a constant conviction to look in my own bank account and see what amount of money that God has entrusted to me, the things that I spend it on. You ever look at your budget that way? I'd encourage you to do so. Think about it. So we've got to understand, if we get nothing else, we have to understand this. Everything we have is God's, and we are stewards of those things. Second, B on your outline, we all should be growing, and it's a process. I don't expect that we all have mastered our stewardship of our money. I haven't, and I'm standing here, so if you want to hook me off the platform, I'd understand. It's a process by which we grow, and God uses our finances to grow us in multiple ways, not only in our own stewardship, in multiple ways. God uses our money, our finances, our possessions. I group all of those things together in the context of this conversation. He uses it as a tool. Philippians 4:11 through 12 says, "Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger." Excuse me. The finances, the possessions, the things that Paul had, God used as a tool to teach him. How do you engage when you have plenty? How do you deal with when you have little? How do you deal with having much, right? And Paul said, I've learned to be content in whatever the circumstance might be. It's a tool that God uses in our lives. But God also uses our possessions as a test. God uses our possessions as a test. Luke 16:11 through 12. "If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you true riches? If you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters. He either loves the one and hates the other, or he is devoted to one and he despises the other. Cannot serve God and money." It's a test. How are we doing at that? The third way that God uses our possessions or our wealth is a testimony. It's a testimony. Matthew 5:13 through 16. "You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all that are in their house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." Do people see how we use our possessions? Do people see how we use our money? You say, they don't have access to my checkbook. No, but they see how you use your home. They see how you spend your money. They see the activities that you're engaged in. The principle here, not speaking specifically to our money necessarily, but speaking to our testimony, is that your good works should shine in such a way that they glorify God. Can that be said of how we handle our stuff? God uses it as a testimony. See on your outline, faith requires action. Faith requires action. In the same chapter in Matthew, when dealing with the parable of the talents, and where we get this principle that he has entrusted to us, that we are stewards. Matthew 25 through 27 says this: "So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours." Essentially what the unjust steward is saying is, I took what you gave me and I'm giving it to you back. Here it is. I've preserved this for you. Look at the response. His master answered him and said, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have scattered no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest." The principle is this: what we've been given should be used to multiply, not necessarily more money. I'm not talking about your investments, so don't worry about what's been going on Wall Street, okay? But I'm talking about investing it for things that are beyond this earth. You can't take your money with you. Your treasures are laid up in heaven, right? God expects us to do something with what it is that you've been given. To me, this is sort of the foundational stuff. We have to understand, especially, I think, in our culture, in America, where it's more, more, more. Climb the ladder, gather more possessions, more investment, more. I want my Lambo. And we live in a culture that glorifies that. How far are you in the corporate ladder? How much money do you have saved? How much? How much? In the accumulation. God's saying, not how much have you accumulated, how much have you invested for me? What I've given you, your home, it's God's home. How have you used it to be a blessing to others? Your possessions, those are God's possessions. How have you used them to be a blessing to others? How have you used them to bring people to Christ? Are you open? Are you hospitable? Do you live your life with an open hand so that the things that God blesses you with are flowing through your hands in and out? Or are you living life with a clutched hand, holding on to whatever you can grasp? If we don't get that right, nothing else matters. In fact, I'd love to spend time with people talking about budgeting and talking about investing and talking about different things that you can be doing with your money, but I have zero interest in doing that with someone who doesn't understand this principle first, because I'm not about helping you accumulate your own wealth. I'm going to get into some practical stuff now, but we've got to get this attitude right. Everything you've been given has been given to you by God, entrusted with you, not as your own possession, but as His possession, and you're a steward of those things. Now, principles of budgeting. We'll get some practical things we'll talk about here. Principles of budgeting. Zig Ziglar says, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. And it's true. If you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. The best definition of budgeting that I've ever seen is from John Maxwell. And he says it this way: a budget is people telling their money where to go instead of wondering where it went. A budget is people telling their money where to go instead of wondering where it went. So here's some practical things about establishing a budget. I was going to ask for a show of hands as to who actually has a written, published budget and who doesn't, but I'll save any potential embarrassment. You should have a budget. Here's the best way to build one. The first thing you do is you record every penny for a period of at least 2 months, preferably 3. And I'm dead serious about that. Every penny. You say, but it's just 50 cents in the soda machine or in the snacks machine at work. I don't care. Write it down, 50 cents. Because here's what happens with most people's budgets. That 50 cents is what's killing you. Because you spend 50 cents a day, and that's $2.50 a week, and that's $10 a month, and you're wondering why you can't pay your electric bill. And it's because you're eating the potato chips, right? Every penny gets recorded. That means you have to save receipts. That means you have to write it down because you don't get a receipt from a vending machine, right? When you put money in the parking meter, write it down somewhere. Every penny gets recorded. Secondly, prioritize giving. I've met with people over the years many times who, when you sit down and you put their budget together, there's no money there to give. In fact, they live in a deficit week after week, month after month, because their budgets don't tie together. If that is your situation, then I counsel people this way. First of all, give something. I don't care if you come to church and you drop a dime in the bucket. You've got to start disciplining yourself to have a prioritize of giving. What you've been given is yours. Is God's. What you've been given is God's. Give back something of what He's given you. Secondly, if that is your situation, you should be on your knees asking for forgiveness every time. You've not been a good steward. I hate to be blunt, but that's the truth of the matter. If you're not making ends meet and you have no ability to give back to God something of what He has entrusted to you, then you need to be in repentance. You need to be asking for forgiveness and be zealous about fixing that situation. You need to prioritize giving. Thirdly, when it comes to your budget, you need to prioritize what Dave Ramsey calls the 4 walls. Prioritize the 4 walls after giving something. And the 4 walls are this: food, shelter, clothing, and transportation. Why is that important? Because if I don't have food and I don't have a place to live, I'm in trouble, right? And if I don't have clothes and I don't have transportation, I can't get to work, right? These are the 4 walls. These are the things that you have to prioritize in your budget. Now, if you say, I'm buying all the designer clothes that I can, that's not what I'm talking about with clothing here, okay? Be smart about how you spend your money on clothing. You don't need brand names. You don't even necessarily need new. Just saying. You need presentable clothing to cover up a naked body. That's what you need, okay? Food, shelter, clothing, transportation, those are your 4 walls. Fourth principle, practice zero-based budgeting. Zero-based budgeting. By that I mean, when you put your budget together, you say, this is my income, here's my expenses, the last line on the budget is 0, right? Ramsey says it this way: every dollar has a name before the month begins. You don't go to the end of the month and say, I've got a surplus. If you've got a surplus, give it a name. Maybe it's giving. Maybe it's your savings. Maybe it's your emergency fund, right? Every dollar has a name when you fill out your budget. Zero-based budgeting. E, start saving. Make savings a priority. If we had a bigger room, I'd ask, but I won't. It's amazing how many people don't have a legitimate emergency fund. Here's the way that we live our lives. We don't save for an emergency. And so as life goes on and emergencies happen, we put it on the credit card. When we finally get our credit card paid off and another emergency happens, we put it on the credit card, right? The way, if you were to ask me, you're looking at your budget, if you were to ask me, what is the thing that I need to do first? My first thing I'm going to tell you is not pay off your credit card debt. It's not the first thing you do. First thing you do is you build an emergency fund. Because the emergency fund is going to stop the cycle of the credit card debt. Okay? Now, most people that you look at, they'll tell you that you need to have at least $1,000 to start. Anybody been able to make $1,000 go very far? Seems like every time I bring my car in for repairs, it's going to get close to that, right? $1,000 is not going to go far, but it's a start. Okay, make it a goal. Set it as a short-term goal. But you can't stop there with your emergency fund, okay? So get an emergency fund. Second thing on your outline there is save 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Now, if you look at, I don't know how familiar you are with different material that's been printed and things like that. Dave Ramsey has a plan. Everybody's got their plan, right? Dave Ramsey's got a plan. They start with that $1,000, and then he suggests you pay off credit card debt. I'm not a fan of that plan. And the reason why I'm not a fan of that plan is $1,000 doesn't stop the cycle. The first emergency is going to eat up your $1,000 and then some, okay? Crown Financial's plan is similar but different. Crown Financial says that you save your first $1,000, that's step one. Step two is any extra money you can put into saving, you put half of it towards that emergency fund, you continue to build that emergency fund, you put the other half of that extra money towards paying off your debt. I like that plan better, okay? Because we've got to get that emergency fund into a position where our credit card isn't our emergency fund, right? So, start an emergency fund, save 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses, that's where your half's going on. Continuing to build that emergency fund and living expenses. Save for major expenses. You need a new sofa? They wear out after a while, especially if you have dogs or kids, right? Save for it. Don't decide we need a new sofa and go out and put it on the credit card. You save for it, you get a new sofa when you get the money for it. And you can buy that sofa without guilt, and then save for retirement. I'm not a huge fan, I'm not a huge fan of the idea that I'm going to save for retirement so that I can go to the beach and play golf. You save for retirement so that you're free to serve. You save for retirement to serve more, right? I can't imagine myself retiring and doing nothing, but you still need to save for it. Social Security is not going to be there for you. It's not going. Expenses will continue to get higher and higher. Social Security is not going to keep pace. So you need to have some money on your own. F on your outline: eliminate bad debt. And again, I don't know. I'm going to assume there's some familiarity with the different financial gurus that are out there. I'm going to focus my attention on what I would consider to be bad debt. Your credit cards are bad debt. If you're paying 29% interest, or 23% interest, or 17% interest, or 10% interest on an asset you no longer have, you ate it because it was dinner, then that's bad debt. There is debt that I'm not necessarily in a hurry to pay off. And I know Dave Ramsey likes to talk about paying off all of your debt, and he brags about the fact that he has a credit rating of 0 because credit ratings are your I love debt score. He's right about that a little bit in terms of it being the I love debt score. But, I think if you listen to one of his seminars, he talks about how he doesn't have a credit rating high enough to rent an apartment, but he could buy the building. That's great if you can buy the building. Okay, the rest of us have to be concerned about our credit rating. And so I'm not a huge fan of paying off all of your debt. I'm a fan of paying off bad debt. If you were fortunate enough over the last few years, Sarah and I were able to refinance our house and did so at an interest rate that's somewhere around 2.5%, slightly over 2.5%. I'm going to call that good debt. I can do better than 2.5% elsewhere. If I had the money to pay off my home right now, today, I wouldn't do it. I'd invest it someplace safe where I'm earning more than 2.5%, and I'd save it there, able to pay off my home, right? So you may have a different conviction on that, and I'm okay with that. You think about it, but my focus would be pay off your bad debt, okay? The stuff that is a depreciating asset, which is kind of a conflict of words, really. It's not an asset if it's depreciating. It's a liability. But if it's a depreciating thing, or if it's something that you don't even have anymore because you ate it, you went out, you took a trip, and you're still paying on it, right? That's bad debt. Get that paid off. G on your outline. We're going to change our concept or our understanding of budgeting. Good budgeting brings freedom, not bondage. In a minute, we'll talk about how we relate with our money. And Dave Ramsey likes to talk about there's always, and oftentimes in a relationship, there's the saver and there's what he calls the free spirit. He calls the saver the nerd. He calls the free spirit the spender. So there's the saver, there's the spender. We'll talk a little bit about how we deal with that. But oftentimes the spender sees a budget as being restrictive, as binding, as bondage. It's, I'm a slave to my budget. We've got to change the way that we think about that. Our budgets bring freedom, no more management by crisis. Managed money goes further. Reduce or eliminate money fights in your relationship. Removes guilt, shame, and fear in your spending. It controls overspending. It reduces stress. Anybody a fan of reducing stress in their life? Right? Budgets are important. They're freeing. They enable you to spend money in categories that you have budgeted. And if you've done a zero-based budget well, the money is there to spend on those things that you want to spend. So it's freeing. You don't have to spend the money on that thing that you want and wonder if you're going to be able to make your mortgage payment because you're living by your budget. Okay? Comments, questions, thoughts on how budgeting works, things that have worked for you. I'll briefly comment about the envelope system. Anybody here, I'll ask this question. Anybody here actually use the envelope system? A little bit? So I'm a fan of it. I say that, and Sarah and I aren't currently using an envelope system, but we did when we were trying to get our budget and our spending under control, and it was really interesting how it worked. Different people do it different ways, but the envelope system is this. The idea behind it is that for certain things in my budget, I am going to set the cash aside each week and learn to manage that cash. And if I ran out, then I wasn't spending any more that week. And I was going to force myself to manage that budgeted item for the routine sort of stuff. Now, for Sarah and I, when we first did the envelope system, it was eating out because we would do that frequently. We'll probably go out this afternoon, Sunday afternoon. That's part of our routine. We go have lunch together. We would use it for gas, for transportation for the cars. We would use it for groceries. Those were the three primary categories. And we had a category that we called miscellaneous. I don't think we put much in it. It might have been $20 in a week that I'd stick in the miscellaneous. And that was there just in case we ran out of grocery money that week, that it would give us a little bit of a buffer, okay? It was interesting. When we first started doing that, it's comical, but it's true. My wife would go to the grocery store with what she had for cash, and you know what suddenly you had to pay attention to? Well, I've got this much left. I need coffee and these three other things. This one costs this much. That one costs something different. And you start managing it. Whereas before, you wouldn't think about it, right? You just grab what you always grab. But now if I have to live within the dollars that I have in my purse, I'm starting to make different choices, right? Managed money always goes further. And more than once, and she'll tell you this if you ask her, more than once she'd get to the cash register and pull out her wallet, pull out the money, and a coupon would fall out that would just make it work. It was that tight at times. But you know what happened? We did that for a period of a number of months. I don't remember exactly how long. And suddenly there was extra money left over. I didn't change the budget. We didn't change the dollars. But we'd get to the end of the week and there'd be extra money left over. You know what we'd do with it? We wouldn't say, okay, we get to live high on the hog next week. We put it in a jar. And next week we lived by the budget amount. And there'd be extra money left over, and we stick it in a jar. You know, I took a vacation off that jar. That was just the money we saved on gas and groceries over a period of several months. The envelope system's a great way to start managing and controlling your spending and increasing your awareness. The other thing that's kind of interesting about it, you know, we live in a world, I'm running out of time quickly, we live in a world where we increasingly pay with credit cards. We're not even doing that anymore. Now you can tap and pay, or you can use your phone, or you can do all kinds of other things, right? Years ago, they did a study where they hooked people up with wires, and they monitored heart rates and your mind waves and all that kind of thing when you spent money. Did you know that when you reach into your pocket and you pull out cash, it actually registers neurologically the same way pain does? Like it hurts to reach in and pull out those dollar bills because it's real. You want to know what's so effective about credit cards, debit cards, if you want to think of it that way? It's not real to us. I don't see that money leaving my presence. And then I get a bill at the end of the month that I can't pay off, and I pay a portion of it, and next thing you know, you've got 28% interest on it. So managed money goes further. Envelope system's a good way. Go to cash. Force yourself to live within the budget. All right, let me give you some principles of communication. Now, how many people are Facebook friends with Justin Brammer, my son-in-law? How many people saw the comment that he made, how often do you and your spouse talk about money? Good. Then I don't have to tell you that my wife responded to that and said, not often enough. I'm going, honey, in 10 days I'm teaching a class on finances. You're throwing me right under the bus. Now, it's a funny thing, and I am not, do not walk out of here and take it this way. I am not suggesting that my wife is out of line. Here's the things that I have done in my home. I've listed every expense that we have. I've highlighted those things, color coordinated, to show which ones automatically come out of the checking account, which ones I write checks for, which ones I have a couple that actually go to the credit card and then I pay the credit card off because I want the points and the reward things and stuff like that. But I've highlighted how all of those things get paid. I mentioned to you earlier, I changed to a bank account that gives us the graph, and I've set up the app on her phone. She can look at it, and she can see everything that comes in and out and set up notifications and see the graph and know everything that we're spending money on. I don't say that to say that she's wrong and saying not enough. Let me start with this. How often should you communicate with your spouse about your finances? There is one right answer, as often as she wants to. And the problem is, if you're like me, and I'm a great under-communicator, I struggle with this, right? I'm going, nothing's changed since I told you about it 6 months ago and set you up with the app. What's to talk about? It doesn't matter. So that's on me. If my wife feels like we're not talking about it enough, I don't care if I'm talking about it every month. Then I need to change it to bi-weekly or weekly. The answer to the question is you talk to her about it as often as she wants you to. And so that's on me. It's an issue that I will address. Let's talk about principles of communication. J. Paul Getty said this, I have never been given to envy, save for the envy that I feel toward those people who have the ability to make a marriage work and endure happily. It's an art I have never been able to master. My record, 5 marriages, 5 divorces, in short, 5 failures. J. Paul Getty was worth about $4 billion in 1981. What did he envy? A marriage that works. When it comes to our money, men and women are different. I'm just going to give you some of them humorous. Dave Ramsey lists these areas of difference. He says men like to share facts, women like to share feelings. Now, you gotta be careful when you paint with a really broad brush, right? It's not universally true of every man or every woman. but it is characteristically true, generally speaking. Men like to share facts, women like to share feelings. Men connect by doing things, women connect by talking. Men tend to be controlling, women tend to be agreeable. It's not always the case, but often, right? Dennis Rainey says men speak 30,000 to 50,000 words a day. Women speak 50,000 to 70,000 words a day. My wife will remind me that's because she has to tell me everything twice. Men define themselves by their ability to achieve results. Women define themselves by the quality of their relationships, according to John Gray. He's the Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus author. So that affects the way that we view our money. For the emergency fund, to men, it's boring. Who wants to save $1,000 and put it in an account that doesn't generate any interest? I'm not trading, I'm not doing something with it, it just sits there. It's boring. To women, it's the most important part of your budget. It represents security. Men get good deals by negotiating. Women get good deals by hunting. Anybody ever gone shopping at Christmas time with your spouse? I don't know, it's all done online now. Maybe you haven't. But back in the day when there was a mall, I raised 3 daughters. They noticed that Dad shops very differently than Mom shops. Mom wants a new sweater for Christmas. Dad knows the store that sells sweaters. He walks in, he gets a sweater, and he leaves. That's shopping, right? My wife knows that someone wants a new sweater for Christmas. She walks in, visits every store that possibly could even think about selling sweaters, touches every sweater that's in the store, and decides which one to choose. In money problems, men lose their self-esteem. Women face fear. We react to money differently. Because we as men identify ourselves by our ability to accomplish something, when we fail at something, it affects the way that we feel about ourselves. It hurts. It makes us feel like failures. Women, they react to it by fear. It affects their security. Money problems, according to Dave Ramsey, are the number 1 cause of divorce in North America. I don't know if that's still true when he wrote that book or not. But I'll tell you this, in the years that I have done financial counseling with people in churches, I have never, that true statement, I have never sat with a couple and only talked about finances. That some issue in their relationship didn't come up along the way that needed to be addressed. Money problems are a significant problem in marriages and in the way that we relate. And so according to Larry Burkett of Crown Financial, therefore money agreement is the number 1 opportunity for marriage improvement when we agree on our money. Listen to this, we agree on our values. Your view of your money reveals your values. People are different. A few non-gender specifics. I don't even know if I have this on your outline. One is always late. The other one has to be on time. Anybody have that in their house? Anybody have thermostat wars in their house? One is detail-oriented and the other one has ADD. One's a spender and the other one's a saver. And this is not necessarily gender specific. If you look at our house, I am more of the spender. My wife is more of the saver. It doesn't have to be that the female is the spender. Okay? But here's the thing, you need each other. You need each other. The spender needs the saver to help them manage their money well. The saver needs the spender so that they have a life. Right? You need each other. So, I think on your outline there, I've got the budget meeting. If you don't sit with your spouse and talk about money, you need to. if you don't sit and work through your budget together and agree, because you've got to agree on your values, you agree on your budget, then you need to do that. Here's some important things to think about when it comes to having a budget meeting. For the saver, or what Dave Ramsey calls the nerd, you prepare the initial budget. If you're the one that is the most careful with your money, if you're the one that is most detail-oriented and more inclined to save, you prepare the initial budget. And then he says, give it to the spender and shut up. Give it to your spouse and let them process what you've put together. Don't jump into justifying it. Don't jump into defending it. Let them review what you've put together and patiently let them process that initial budget. Second tip, this is a budget meeting. It's not a week-long summit. Okay? You will quelch if you and your spouse are not on the same page with how you spend money and things like that. There may be a little more creative, a little more free spirit. You're going to squash any input if this turns into a marathon 12-hour meeting, right? Give it to them, be quiet, let them process it, understand that it's a meeting, not a week-long summit. Thirdly, insist, and I think this is an important one, and you can negotiate this, and you got to be careful with it, but you should insist that your spouse make a change. And this is hard, especially if you're a super detail-oriented person and you think you have got it, you put this budget together and it is a work of art, right? You need to insist that your spouse make a change. Why do that? There's one very practical reason. If she changes anything, she's now an owner of the budget too. When it comes to your relationship with your spouse and you're talking about money things, if you're the one that put the budget together and you railroaded that through so that they just got so weakened down and beaten down that they stopped giving you input, it's still your budget when the two of you have a disagreement, okay? If she makes a change, it's our budget. We've agreed on this. We've both got skin in the game to make it work, right? You're trying to build the partnership in how you spend your money, your agreement around your values. Okay, a couple of quick rules for the spender. I know we're over here. A couple of rules for the spender or the free spirit. First of all, you must show up for the meeting. If you're the spender in the relationship and your spouse wants to sit down and work through a budget with you, spenders don't like to have that conversation. Okay? You got to show up for the meeting. You got to be present. You must bring your brain. Spenders tend to operate on emotion, feeling, impulse. Right? Most people who would characterize themselves as spenders aren't the kind of people that have engaged their brain before they spend. Most of the time, spenders are working in reaction or impulse to something, right? So when you come to the budget meeting, bring your brain. Be engaged. You must work together. And for the spender, never again say whatever you want to do. Because as soon as I say that, it's your budget again. It's your plan. It's not mine. I've not bought into it, right? Do not allow the spender in your relationship just whatever you want to do. Okay, they've got to be engaged in the process. A couple of rules for communication that I think I included at the end of your outline there. Rules for communication. This comes from Howard Dayton. He is formerly with Crown Financial Ministries. He is now with his own group called Compass, Finance is God's Way. He started that in 2008 or something like that. Anyway, rules for communication. Number one, listen. Now, I don't mean hear. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Hearing means I hear the words coming out of your mouth, but I'm thinking about how I'm going to respond to those words. Listening means I'm seeking to understand. If you're one of those types of people that struggles listening, here's a good way for you to test that, okay? Next time somebody is speaking to you, you focus your attention on asking an intelligent follow-up question. It'll help you not focus on how you're going to rebut whatever it is that's coming out of their mouth at that time, right? Listen, seek to understand. Secondly, say what you mean. Let's be direct. Say what you mean. Third, pick the right time and the right place. Boy, I fail at this one too often on any subject matter, right? If you got 20 minutes and you're sitting down for a quick cup of coffee or something, it's probably not the time to bring up the budget discussion, right? Pick the right time, the right place, free from distraction, free from interruption for whatever conversation you're going to have. Fourth, be honest. Be honest. If you don't like something that's in the budget, or you don't like the attitude that's being presented, or you don't like the direction that this thing is going, stop. In love, not in anger and not lashing out, but be honest. Say, I'm just not comfortable with where this is going. Don't sit there and say, oh, it's okay, and then bring it up and bring it up and bring it up in the months to come. Leave the baggage at home. By that I mean this. If you're anything like me, I admit that many times the lessons that I've learned in managing money, I've learned from my own mistakes. I've learned in the school of hard knocks. It would be really easy for Sarah to bring that baggage to this conversation. Well, you remember that time 20 years ago, you did this, and we had this problem, right? That is not helpful for today's budget conversation, right? Leave the stuff in the past. If your wife is the spender and you're talking about today's budget, it's probably not a good idea to remind her of the credit card debt that she had 10 years ago and how you had to dig out of that hole. Leave the baggage alone. Deal with the here and now. Have regular money meetings, and again, by regular, I mean as often as she needs to, wants to. Or if you're the spender and you're the curious one and your wife, is the saver, then maybe you want to have the meeting. But whoever wants to, you have the meetings as often as one of you wants to have the meeting and talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about when it comes to your finances. Have regular money meetings. Pray together. That maybe should be at the top of the list. Pray together. How often do you enter into a conversation about money with your spouse and you haven't yet prayed about it? Go to the Lord, pray together. Enjoy a little humor, right? A little levity is good. Now I'm talking to the men, seek your spouse's counsel. God has given you a helpmeet. Let them help, right? If you're just running over whatever their thoughts and ideas are, their contribution to this conversation, because you're so convinced that you've got it right, you're not letting them help. Let your wife help. Seek their counsel. And lastly, and I think this is a really important one, set goals together. Set goals together. Live for a purpose that you are striving to together, because whatever the little disagreements are along the way, if you're living for the same goal, if you're driven by the same motivation and you're living for the same outcome, you've got purpose. You can get through the difficulties and the challenges of those conversations. All right, I know I'm way over. I apologize for that. If you need to leave, want to leave, you can leave. If you have questions, I'm happy to field any of those. If there's something we didn't talk about, then we'll ask Jonathan for another week. Yeah.
But it's educating him. Like, how does that play in? Should I not
So,
go that route, being that it is gambling in a sense?
boy, I mean, that's kind of a can of worms, because you're going to find a lot of different opinions on this. So I'll just give you some of my perspective on investing. Right? Your attitude going into it and how you go about it has everything to do with how much you're flirting with the line of gambling. Right? If I go in and I buy a lottery ticket for $2 because I'm hoping to win $500 million, on the sheer chance that certain numbers get selected, I'm gambling. Okay? If I'm investing in a company by buying stocks in Coca-Cola, I'm in ownership with a company that's been around for 100+ years, and if I'm holding on to those stocks, I'm trusting that the value of that investment is going to go up. No more than I would be if I bought a piece of land or something else, right? It's an ownership and a tangible asset that is real that you're hoping goes up. Now, is there risk involved? Yeah, sure there is. There's risk involved. I mean, it could go down. We're going into a recession. I think you're going to see the stock market stay down for a while now, right? It's a difference in your attitude. Now, if I'm constantly trading stock, like I'm buying and selling in the day trading, you're starting to get a little closer to gambling, right? Then I think you got to start looking at, first of all, if I had a category where I would say that's intelligent, informed trading, then you got to ask yourself, well, how much of my investing am I doing that way, right? And we got to not be foolish there. So I'm not going to draw a hard line on which investment vehicle that you might choose, whether or not it's gambling. There's risks associated with any of them. I think you need to be careful, and I think the greater your risk, the smaller amount you should be playing with there, right? We need to be wise stewards. This is where that principle comes into play. If everything that I have is God's, am I handling what He has entrusted to me wisely? And that's between you and the Lord and your own conscience in some ways. But I'm going to suggest that the one-armed bandit at the casino is not good stewardship. Make sense? Good question. What did I mean by which one? Oh, humor? I think conversations regarding mistakes that I've made, you as a husband and wife in particular, have to be able to laugh at. The other day I opened up the refrigerator and I found inside my refrigerator a jar of peanut butter. So I teasingly said to my wife, I've been finding things that you're leaving around lately in odd places. I found the chips the other day with the pots and pans. And I found the peanut butter in the refrigerator. Now, she has two choices when I point that out. She could be offended and angry, or we can laugh at it together, right? And I'm glad we chose to laugh at it together. There needs to be some humor, because you're going to make mistakes too. You're going to make a dumb decision. You're going to order something you shouldn't have ordered and break it. And the I told you so's and the accusations are not helpful, right? Having a little humor, a little levity around things like that can be helpful. Keeping our eye on the main prize. Because if I'm aligned on my goal, hiccups along the way can be overcome. Let's laugh at the hiccups, learn from them, and keep our eye on the goal.
When Satan tempts me to despair and tells me of the guilt within, upward I look and see Him there, who made an end to all my sin, because the sinless
I have heard of things like that, but I've not examined them and to see how well they work. One of the things that the reason why I switched banks, one of the reasons why I switched banks was because of the collection of the data that they get around where you spent your money and the graph that I can look at. Now, this I did in the last 2 or 3 months, so I still have not figured out how to make that graph as useful as I would like it. In other words, I want to go in and create different categories and say, no, this bill I want you to assign to this category, and this next time you see this expense, I want you to call it gas or what. I haven't figured out exactly how to manage all of that yet. But that's my tool now to sort of keep track of how we're doing on budgets, and I'm still working on refining what that looks like. As an envelope system, I don't know if I've seen one, because the beauty of the envelope system, physically anyway, is that I open the envelope and there's nothing there. I'm not spending money today. Online, I'm not exactly sure how you would be able to do that and have the same controls, especially in the day and age of Amazon and things like that. Yeah. But there would be no mechanism there to stop you from spending money that, yeah. Yeah, but it lets you know you're over. And so it increases the awareness part of it, but there's no physical stopping of the spending part of it. Yeah. That's helpful. Good. Any other questions? All right, let me pray real quick and we'll dismiss. Lord, we do thank you for the time you spend in your word. Thank you for the time we can consider this matters of finances. Lord, I pray that you give each one of us wisdom in handling our money. Give us wisdom and working with our finances and our marriages and our relationships. But Lord, most of all, give us the right attitude that comes from you. Help us to remember and understand that everything that we have is something that you have entrusted to us and that we are stewards of. And Lord, one day we will give an account of how we've handled those things. We ask your blessing on these men. Give us wisdom as we go about these matters. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.